Good evening, and welcome to Black Blood. Oh, wow. Thank you, Professor Chong. Oh, my gosh. It's so divine. Like I was thinking of roses. Wow. So welcome to Black Blood, Death and Mourning in the Black Caribbean. This event is a part of an initiative here at Union called Theologizing the Caribbean's Decolonization. And my name is Naya Toussaint. The theme of Black Blood came out of many of our lived experiences as seminarians and dealing with the afterlife in every conversation we have, but also from a current work that I am wrestling with. After the murder of Saeed Vassell by NYPD in April 2018, I have been thinking about how Caribbean people live in environments of death. We are killed by the police, smog, litter, natural disaster, and health disparities that plague our community. In response to this, in my current research, I am finding that though it is a tremendous injustice for my people to live in such conditions, we must acknowledge that we are living. Black body, black blood, black breath, resiliently pushes back against the lethal environment that it is systematically placed in. And today, we have come to honor such resilience by mourning over the fact that it is still needed for us to be resilient, and yet believing that this resiliency still works for us. So we invite you to join us on this journey called Black Blood. And now I'm going to invite Amo to space in prayer.
Good evening. You can get into a posture of prayer that is most comfortable for you. Are rapeleng, let us pray. Modimo wa rena, re leboga go na le rena mamotla o. Re a go amogela. Re re o be le rena mamotla. Batho ba tlo ba bolela ka taba tše e leng gore di botlhoko. Ene re rapela gore moya wa gago o be le rena. Moya wa gago o re fetiše. Modimo re leboga gore le ge batho ba bolela mamotla, batho ba tla kwešiša gore o nyaka go ba botša eng. And le gona gore batho ba fole, ene le gona gore batho ba tsebe rona le bona mamotla le mamotla le mamotla le ka go sa feleng. Re a go leboga Modimo Morena Jesu. Re a go leboga. Amen.
This is what Yahweh Almighty says. Consider now, call for the wailing women to come. Send for the most skillful of them. Let them come quickly and wail over us, till our eyes overflow with tears and water streams from our eyelids. The sound of wailing is heard. How ruined we are. How great is our shame. We must leave our land because our houses are in ruins. Hurricane Marie swept across our lands, devastating Puerto Rico and Dominica, and wreaking havoc on the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guadeloupe, Barbados, the Dominican Republic, Bahamas, and Haiti. Hurricane Irma demolished Barbuda. On August 28, 2018, nearly a year after the hurricane, Puerto Rico revised its official tally of 64 killed in the hurricane, up to 2,975 people. making the total dead 3,057 people. An estimated 2,975 people died in Puerto Rico. 65 died in Dominica. 5 died in the Dominican Republic. 4 died in the United States. 3 died in Haiti. 2 in Guadeloupe. 3 in the U.S. Virgin Islands. 3,057 people died. For months after Hurricane Marie, the United States neglected to respond to the devastation, much in the same way African Americans were neglected after Hurricane Katrina. While the richest nations on this planet live in a way that contributes to climate change, it is the poorest and the blackest countries and communities that are hit hardest by the results of climate change. While white evangelicals continue to deny climate change, our black blood cries from New Orleans to Puerto Rico as a witness to the idol of white supremacy. 3,057 bodies, spirits, and souls called the wailing women. Now you women hear the word of Yahweh. Open your ears to the words of his mouth. Teach your daughters how to wail. Teach one another a lament. Death has climbed in through our windows and has entered our homes. It has removed the children from the streets and the young men from the public squares. On September 6, 2018, St. Lucia-born Botham Jean Shem was killed by a police officer in his own home. He was a praise and worship leader, a wailer who was buried in his native St. Lucia. In neighborhoods like my hometown of East New York, Brooklyn, which is one of the 7 neighborhoods in New York City that sends the most people to New York State's prisons, police would normally round up black men and boys standing on street corners, sometimes on a daily basis. Growing up before we had camera phones, some of these brothers never made it back from the roundups alive. Botham Jean Shem's black blood cries out, a testimony to the idol of white supremacy. Call the wailing women. This is what Yahweh declares. Dead bodies will lie like dung on the open field, like cut grain behind the reaper, with no one to gather them. In the fall of 2010, months after a devastating earthquake struck Haiti, a new disaster began, a cholera outbreak that killed thousands of people and continues to sicken people across the country. Experts determined that the source of the disease was a UN peacekeeping camp, and now the United Nations has admitted it played some role in the deadly outbreak. At a briefing, UN spokesperson Farhan Haq said, the UN has become convinced that it needs to do much more regarding its own involvement in the initial outbreak and the suffering of those affected by cholera. For more than 5 years, there was a high-level denial of any involvement or responsibility of the United Nations in the outbreak, which has killed at least 10,000 people and sickened hundreds of thousands. 10,000 Haitian spirits, souls, and bodies. 10,000 cries of black blood standing as a witness to and condemnation of the idol of white supremacy. Call the wailing women. This is what Yahweh says. Let not the wise boast of their wisdom, or the strong boast of their strength, or the rich boast of their riches, but let the one who boasts boast about this, that they have the understanding to know me, that I am Yahweh who exercises kindness, justice, and righteousness on earth, for in these I delight. Whether it is Hurricane Marie, Irma, or Katrina, police brutality, or medical apartheid. Black blood is crying out due to a global system of white supremacy that is carried out not only by the United States, but by the United Kingdom, France, Germany, and many other places where empire is being built on the backs of Black bodies. Tonight, as we listen to the cries of Black blood from Africa to the diaspora, let us not turn to the wisdom of the ivory tower. Let us not boast about the strength of our modern movements. And let us not trust in the riches of the West to save our people through their aid and debt. But let us turn to the Creator as the Spirit speaks through our ancestors, our native lands, and our traditions. Black blood cries out, and we must answer with the wisdom of the wailing women who represent our mothers, who hold our ancestral ways and traditions. Ashe and amen.
The great Russian writer Dostoevsky said, quote, "There is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of my suffering," unquote. As I reflected on that saying in relation to Black suffering, I said, there is only one thing I dread, not to be worthy of the life that the suffering of my Black ancestors have made possible for me. I wanted to be a faithful witness to the redemptive meaning of their nearly 400 years of suffering. I am here at Union Seminary today because my ancestors suffered and died for me and for many others like me. Union Seminary, founded in 1836, but not for the freedom of Black people. Black freedom was not a part of its educational ministry. Cain killed his brother Abel, but Abel's blood spoke. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." Now, Cain can be viewed as a metaphor for white people and Abel for Black people. God is asking white Americans, especially Christians, where are your Black brothers and sisters? And whites respond, we don't know. Are we their keepers? And the Lord says, what have you done to them for 4 centuries? The blood of Black people is crying out to God and to whites from the ground in the United States of America. The blood of Sandra Bland in Texas and Tamir Rice in Ohio. The blood of the Emmanuel Nine in Charleston and of Eric Garner on Staten Island. The blood of nearly 5,000 lynched Blacks. The blood of Nat Turner, Denmark Vesey, and Gabriel Prosser, and the many thousand gone, millions gone on the auction block and under the lash and during the middle passage. Black blood is crying out to God from the ground all over this land. Is anybody listening to the cries of black blood? That strange fruit that Billie Holiday sang about. Blood on the leaves and blood at the root.
So we welcome you into this space, and I call upon our first panel, or as we like to say, community discussants, to come to the center. In a very non-traditional panel, as we come together as a village, as Dr. Niang would say, and begin to discuss the topic at hand.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. The ancestors are here. And those loved ones who have passed are listening to us. They are around us. We acknowledge their presence, and they're speaking through us. We will begin this conversation on an African perspective, but this African perspective is both continental and also diaspora. That's a great thing. Mourning the African way, but also how one reacts to a life that is violated. Death and dying. Our first is Shola from Nigeria, southwest of Nigeria, and we will hear something about singing, poetry, chants, and I'll turn it over to Shola.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So as Dr. Niang already said, my name is Shola, and I'm from the Yoruba tribe, which is in southwest Nigeria. And the first thing I want to say about mourning is that, first of all, it is not a private event. It is not an individual event. It is not a household event. It is every single person in a community being part of the entire process of when a person has died to when the person is buried, till even the recovery of the bereaved and their integration back into society. And because of that, there is no way you would be in a community and not know that someone is dead. Like, there is just no way. Because as soon as that kind of event happens, singing happens, poetry happens, many people come together to mourn. Usually it's the women that mourn, but the men's roles in the mourning period is also to prepare a burial site for this person. And they also take part in investigating why this person has died, how this person has died. And there's even this saying that Anki, Ansa, Holo Menyoku, which just literally means we're singing about this person, we're talking about this person. You have no excuse whatsoever for not knowing who has died. And in the songs that they sing, obviously, as you can imagine, it's going to be a song that is proportional, no, not proportional, that is appropriate for the kind of person that has died. So if it was an older person, someone who has lived a good life, the songs that accompany that kind of of death is joyous, of course, because then again, there isn't, as much as people would miss whoever is dead, there is still that sense of a continuation in the spirit world. And you know, it's as what Amo's prayer already did, as Dr. Nyang's earlier remarks also referenced, the ancestors are always present. So when a person dies, you know that this person is living on in a non-bodily way. You do have access to them, and you can always invite them into events, into anything really. So singing, poetry, chants are very, very key features of what happens when a person dies. And the songs reflect who that person was, the circumstances around their birth. It reflects even how the person died and what people should remember about that person. And if there is one thing we all know about songs, they're easy to remember. I mean, think about the songs you learned in nursery school or something. You can almost remember them now. So it's an important way that a community passes on the memory of a person through songs, through singing. And for people who do remembrance, these are the things you come back to remind the community of this person that used to be in that family, in the bodily form. Then the other important thing I wanted to mention about what happens in mourning, at least from my context, is the importance of showing solidarity, communal solidarity through visits and sleepovers. So not only family members come around, friends come around, everyone comes around really. There isn't one thing I find strange with civilization these days is that we almost have to define how a person is related to you. Oh, that's my cousin on my mother's side, or my brother-in-law's child's something. But the way everyone works in a village is, it's either your elder sibling or your younger sibling, your parent or your child, that's it. So it doesn't matter if you're biological or not, like those kind of categories just don't come up. So when people come together in times of mourning, it really is your brothers, your sisters, your parents, your children that are coming together to stay with you, to comfort you, to just be there really. And there isn't anything specific they have to do other than just being there. And whatever it is a bereaved might need, food, whatever, they take care of that. So, two things. The first thing is publicity. The second thing is showing solidarity. And this could happen in any way, shape, or form. But of course, with the way the world is going now, many communities are not able to do this as long as it ordinarily would happen, because we're so busy with work. And we need to make money, and we need to do stuff. And you don't have time to visit family and stay too long. You know, you could barely afford more than a weekend these days. But it used to be that as long as this person needs to get back on their feet, there would be people there. And the third thing I did want to mention was the person who dies determines how mourning is done. So as I said before, if it's an older person who has lived a good life, there's really no reason to be sorrowful about that. You're happy that this person is resting from their daily labor and they're in a good place, and you know that their spirit will always be with you. But if it's a younger person, then it becomes all the more important to investigate how this person has died, why this person has died, because the expectation is that someone who dies without getting old hasn't lived a complete life. And so it's just important to be really sure if really this was God's plan for this person to die at such an age, or the injustice in society has killed this person. And people take these things very seriously. It is very, very serious. If someone has died because of it for unjust reasons, these will be investigated, and sometimes it requires that the entire community has to be purged of that injustice. I mean, there would literally be rights for like 7 days, a month long, to clean the community of that injustice that has killed someone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shola. And as you already heard, the ancestors are with us, and they're speaking through us. And only love will tell us how that works in context of ministry.
Thank you, Doctor. And thank you, Sister, for sharing. I'm going to be speaking a little bit about the mourning woman tradition, or what some call the wailing women tradition, and how I took knowledge of this as an African-American woman and started a prayer ministry to address some of the issues that have been talked about tonight with our people, and how through being invited to various communities in Ghana and Nigeria by the elders to learn about some of these traditions, it gave me a better understanding of what happens in my own African-American context. As we're here tonight at 8:00 p.m., there will be women of African descent from across America and the world coming together for a weekly Wailing Woman prayer that's been happening since 2015. And so I want to just bring into the room a young woman from my faith community named Joy Morgan, who is being mourned as a victim of domestic violence, because that will be what is being wailed over tonight. And so I do want to bring her into the room. The Wailing Women calls started in the fall of 2015 in response to an African-American girl that was body slammed by her teacher at a school here in America. She was actually in foster care, and as a former foster child, it really hit my heart. But if you remember the fall of 2015, it had been about a year of seeing Black people killed on camera. And so as a faith organizer and a faith leader, many in my community were weary. And so with my friend who is from Jamaica, Sister Minister Siobhan McKay, we started the Wailing Women prayer calls. In 2018, they were actually taken over by Mother Angela Malaka Phillips. But what we do is, using inspiration from Jeremiah 9, verses 17 to the end of the chapter that I read tonight, we have a space where Black women from wherever you are in the world can come together and mourn and weep about the issues that are currently happening in our community. So I like to take what is in the academy and bring it into the community. If it's a womanist ethos, if it's something from, African culture. And so in Jeremiah 9, I actually saw a lot of parallels to what was happening to us as a people. And after researching the mourning woman tradition, being on the ground in Nigeria and Ghana, and also looking into it more and learning from the elders, I did an online course about the mourning women tradition for Black women. So I just want to give some context before I share about how this can be employed in ministry. Dr. Will Gaffney, who's a womanist scholar, says that the mourning women or the wailing women could be equivalent to professional counselors. The practice of having paid mourners began in Africa in the ancient Near East, and these were actually trained women. And excuse my voice for tonight. But throughout Africa, there are professional mourning women and wailing women who are employed to publicly weep, wail, and lament for the deceased. Growing up as an African American and having to go to the South for these elaborate, long funerals where people were trying to jump in the grave and doing all this stuff that scared me, I did not fully understand until I began to engage West African culture in particular, what that emotion was about. Now I say, if you don't try to jump into my grave when I die, you didn't really love me. So one of the groups that I have spent a great deal of time with for my upcoming book, and I've learned from the elders of this group, are the Ewe of Ghana. And among the Ewe, funerals are one of the most important events in the people's history, a person's history. They're more lavish and expensive than any other celebration and feast. But also among the Ewe, what I love is that drummers are hired and there are professional dancers. Attending and contributing to the funeral, as my sister stated, already is a communal event. Women don't only wail, but they dance among the Ewe. And so I love to think about what it means to actually be able to dance in the midst of mourning. Another group that I have learned a great deal from are the Ga Adami of Ghana, and they have very complex funeral and widow rites. The reasons why some people may go through widow rites vary, and among different people in modern society, some may go through it, some may not. But many times it's around love, farewell, and sometimes to prove the woman's innocence in the time of the husband's death. My sister's looking at me. We're going to have a womanist discussion after I see you, sis. I'm just reporting it how I learned it from the elders, not meaning I'm with it. But these are some of the reasons why people go through widow rites. Sometimes the wife sleeps in the room with her dead husband for about 7 days. I want to just skip to the Igbo of Nigeria. I've been invited many, many times to go to Igbo land, sat at the feet of the elders, been to every Igbo state except for one. I'm not an expert at all, but they will get on me if I don't mention them. So they also have very elaborate widow mourning where the wailing actually proves how much the woman loved the husband. So if she does not do the elaborate crying and wailing and weeping, she can be accused of not really loving her husband. She also spends a period of around 28 days with the husband. This is in traditional culture. You may not see this in the cities. And so I wanted to touch on those traditions of the widow rites and women having to prove their love, but also the different ways that wailing can be utilized. It can be paid professional mourners, or it can be a wife mourning for her husband. But what I love about these traditions is, whether it's the Ewe or the Ga or the Igbo, it's a community affair. You do see the funerals advertised so anyone can come. Being an African American, I get invited and I say, well, I don't know the person, I can't come to the funeral. It's like, no, you come. And I want to just make it clear that many of these traditions are also found in South Africa. The more prominent you are, the more mourners you have. In my class, I show videos of mourning women from Tanzania and Ghana, but the late Ada Maria Diaz-Stevens, who was my advisor here, and a Latino scholar, shared that in Puerto Rico, when someone dies, you go outside into the wilderness and you actually wail at the top of your lungs. And you wail with all you have. And some Southern African American funeral homes that are historically Black owned do have paid professional mourners that you can employ. So I think that is interesting. But in closing, what I want to say is, through learning about this mourning woman tradition and having these prayer calls, I've started to challenge Black women from anywhere in the diaspora to think about, what would it mean to believe that God needs our tears, our weeping, and our mourning? What does that mean, and how can we employ this mourning or wailing woman tradition in our movements for justice to really raise our voices about what is happening to our people? Because as my sister stated, if someone dies in a community in Ghana, it's not an isolated event. The whole community mourns. So if someone's killed by police violence in Queens, I should be mourning for them too.
Thank you very much, Only Love. And from Nigeria, Southwest Nigeria, with our panelist, Shola, to only love African American context, but in terms of ministry, we move to Jane. And Jane will now, the third panelist, will help us understand what someone from Ghana, specifically, a specific context that you will share with us, will basically teach us about what it means from a Ghanaian perspective, specific to her context, what it means to experience loss and what it means to experience it communally.
Thank you, Dr. Nyang. So again, my name is Jane. I'm from Ghana. And first of all, I want to say thank you to the organizers of this program. And then thank you to Naya. So when, when Naya invited me to be part of this discussion, I was actually in my busy moment. And he kind of like followed me all over the place. Oh, yeah. And then he was asking, Jane, do you get what I'm saying? And I'm like, yeah, it's about death, right? And so I'm like, thank you so much. But that got me thinking, and I asked myself, what is my experience with death? I will not claim to know a lot about death, but death has not been a stranger to me, and it hasn't been a stranger to any of you either. So I was born after twins, and for some reason they mysteriously died. And then at age 2, my dad also died overseas. And I ended up falling sick a lot. Every year, I would visit the hospital more than 7 times or 10 times. And my mom would do everything possible in her power to make sure that I also don't leave her. My grandmother, who was the high priest of our village, actually performed, she's a high priestess, she performed a lot of rituals just to keep me alive. And upon that, like, she also made 3 pots and 3 stools. And what she was trying to communicate to me was that my siblings are not gone. Mm-hmm. And so I will be asked to put water in those pots every single time they run out. And then I will be asked to sit and speak, communicate with my siblings. So the stool is in 3, like we have 3, 1 is bigger, 1 is medium, and 1 is small. I will sit on the small one as if they are present with me and then have a conversation with them. My great-grandmom said doing that, my twin siblings would advocate for me to be alive. Mm-hmm. And so though I was battling with death, I had people living in a realm that I don't know, fighting for me to stay alive. Death will always come, but they help me. I hope you don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about culture. So what I was taught is death only ends a life, but death does not end a relationship. Mm-hmm. And so those who are dead have actually, they are in transition. They've moved into another realms, which we do not know. Even if we know of it, we cannot explain it. Mm-hmm. And so usually what we do in Ghana, when someone dies, because it's their next adventure, people are either giving gift. The deceased are either giving gift. Sometimes it could be in the form of money, or clothing, or even drinks. They give it to them. Like when you go, use this money and cross over the river, if there's a river, buy something if you need food, drink if you want to drink, and they use all these gifts, put it in the coffin, and bury them. Mourning those people who have passed is also related to honor of the children and the family as well, and the community. And so when it comes to funeral, when a person is dead, all the family members have to come together, put the body in the mortuary. It sometimes takes weeks or months because they know the importance of mourning. It's not just like putting the body in the grave and then that is the end of it. No. It has to do with the honor of the family and the children. So each member of the family is asked to contribute an amount of money. So if all of us are one big family, all of you will pay maybe $1,000.
Yes.
Each person had to bring that money on a so and so date, and you had to bring it. If you don't bring it, shame on you. And so each person contributes. And when that money is gathered, food is bought from that money, clothes is bought, drinks are bought from that money, and then the funeral starts. And so the whole community also contributes by going to the mortuary and then marching from the mortuary to the funeral ground and then from the funeral ground to the burial ground. And this they do with happiness and sadness, because mourning is incomplete without these two. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Now we turn to Ekama, who will be giving us, now if I'm wrong, please help me, from a Euro-American Nigerian context. I like that. Yeah, that's good. So we turn it over to you, and please tell us, what are we hearing?
Okay, can y'all hear me? Okay. So my family is from Cross River State in southern Nigeria, and we are one of the many minority groups in Nigeria. Our ethnic group is called Agbo, and typically it's a majority Christian community, and historically from missionizing by the Presbyterian Church from Scotland mainly, and the Catholic Church. Those would be historically the major Christian denominations you would see in Cross River State, or in our part of Cross River State. And I think that's represented in my personal context. My dad's extremely Presbyterian, and my mom was raised Catholic, but we brought her over to the dark side. And I think that's changing a lot because I think Christianity's changing demographics is very well mirrored in Nigeria with the rise of non-denominationalism and Pentecostalism. And so like now there's like 8 churches in our village, which there's more churches than people, I think sometimes. And so like these like Christian ways to experience death and mourning are very apparent in a lot of our traditions and the things that we do. And in terms of like burying someone, that timeline, if you are a member of a church, is going to be determined by your church membership. And so the pastor would be the person who's setting like the date and the time for a burial service. And yeah, they'd be setting the time for that. And if you're not a member of a church, you probably wouldn't have like the church flavored things around your death experience for your community. But a little anecdote, my dad was telling me that if you were not a member of the Presbyterian Church and that was the person who was officiating over your funeral, your body would not be able to enter the gates of the church for your own funeral. And I think that like represents a very specific and staunch kind of like hardcore like Protestantism that I don't think that I see here in America when it comes to like being strict around parish ministry and what your flock looks like. And so that's really interesting. And I think that one thing that I remember the first time I ever saw a dead body, it was a photograph of my grandfather's funeral, and he was 3 years old when I passed, and my dad went to the funeral. We were still living in England. My dad went to the funeral, and he brought back pictures, and I was absolutely terrified because he had like the cotton stuck to his nose, and like 3-year-old Ekman was like, what is this, and why are there pictures of it? Because I think there's a lot of superstition around like the sanctity of the dead body, and like why would you take a picture of it? And like for a 3-year-old, it just kind of like amplified all of those things, and it would. Having an open casket funeral is important because you have to make sure you're burying the right person. Mm-hmm. And so, and open casket yeah, and so again, I think different cultures, especially in the West, are moving away from like visibly looking upon dead bodies, but that's really important for sending someone on to the next thing. And a couple years ago, my cousin passed. She was 21 in a car accident, and this happened in Texas. And I'm a twin, and she's also a twin. And so, like, when you're 21, you don't really have, like, a death plan that you discuss with your family members. And so her twin said, yeah, like, we've had discussions, and so we're going to do a cremation. And we don't do that. So that added a lot of, we did end up cremating her, and it added a lot of, like, why would you destroy a body that's supposed to go in the ground in order to, like, honor this person? And that was a mess. But yeah, just like having those conversations about like how putting a whole body into the ground is an important part of sending them off to the next thing that happens after our earthly existence. And kind of common practice, I think in a lot of West African cultures, but definitely in my context, is awake keeping. And so that could last, should be overnight, could last a couple of days. And especially as folks die in Nigeria and we are in the diaspora now, how it's not really cost effective or time effective to go over for everyone's funerals. So keeping wake in America and the UK is something that we do, and it may coincide with a similar time that a wake may be happening in Nigeria, and again, you're bringing together a community. Like, these things don't happen in singularity. Like, the whole squad's got to roll through, and that's like really beautiful. Even like maybe again people you don't know, but they're coming together to honor this person that was an important part of your life. And I think everyone's touched upon like people should see you mourning. Mm-hmm. It is a visible thing, and it's not common anymore, but if maybe your spouse passed, you may mourn for a full year and wearing black. And I've always considered that to be like a very like highbrow British tradition that maybe has like passed over to Nigeria in some places. And also, both of my aunts were widowed at really young ages. Well, in context, yeah. They were widowed young, before their 40s, and they have both kept short hair to show the community that they are widows in mourning. And neither of them remarried, and they both still have short hair, and that's like a tribute and a testament to like the men that they were married to. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ekama, and thank you all the panelists. Please give them a wonderful applause. As a professor, I can't just help it. I have a question for you.
Go ahead.
You use the word superstitious.
Oh, yes.
Can you explain? As an African, I don't like that word, but go ahead.
I think superstition and things in terms of things that are cultural that may be frowned upon in a Christian context.
Oh, that's the Christian thing, right? Okay, okay. Well, thank you all so much, yes. Thank you. I wanted that clarified because my elders would have been terrified hearing me saying superstitious. So thank you so much. And did you feel a breeze a minute ago? Who said it's cold?
It's cold.
I thought the ancestors were coming to see us. Oh, yeah. There's a poem that was written by a Senegalese, and the title in French is Souffle, and it means breath or wind. The ancestors are in the wind that's blowing. Our breath is actually the ancestors going back and forth. In the water, the ancestors are being heard and seen, especially when the water is a stream. But also there's another thing. How about you? You embody the ancestors. That is something to think about. And we live, they move with us, they come through dreams, unless you read Freud. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. So our panels, yes.
Thank you. Hello? Hello. Thank you, Dr. Niang. And we are going to go right into our second panel, actually. So I'm going to invite our crew up.
Welcome. I'm Samuel Cruz.
Can I do something really quickly? Sorry, I'm so sorry. But I would like to honor President Jones joining us and all the union faculty that have joined us. I'm sorry I didn't do that in the beginning, but thank you all for being here with us. And this is Dr. Cruz.
Yes. I was about to do that actually, but also I am grateful for Union Center for Community Engagement and Social Justice to support this event and the one we had last November and the ones that we will have in the future. Also thank obviously Nair and all the students that are involved and Jonathan Soto, who's been so instrumental in the last couple of months in helping us get this stuff together. So this second panel is about the suppression of African mourning practices in the Americas as Black Christians. And what we're going to do with this panel is do it a little differently, do it actually like I normally teach, which is to have a conversation, although each panelist has a particular topic that they're going to be addressing. Nair is going to be dealing with Haitian American, Black American context, Haitian funeral rites, and African traditional religions. Rosalie is going to be dealing with the Dominican practice of praying novena with the challenge of only 3 days for bereavement at work. Nordia is going to be dealing with the celebration or lack thereof of righteous and unrighteous people's death and how this leads to a suppression of African traditional religious mourning in the Black church experience. And Hassan is going to deal with a lot of things. The last bullet point? Okay. Hassan wrote a dissertation like he normally does, but it's always good. It's good. U.S. Black religious movement and dance, not merely a vestige of static Africanisms, persevered or archaic retentions maintained, but rather the returns of African religious systems reconditioned by realities of modernity's anti-Black racial project, a phenomenon made evident in the moment of mourning and funeral customs. So he'll explain it afterwards. I just want to say something to start the conversation. As I was reflecting upon these topics, I was thinking that, I think it's been said already, but I just want to, I guess, repeat it for myself. But it seems that race and racism permeates even the process of death and dying for Black people in this country. How you mourn, how you do memorial services. You know, it makes me think about how quite often people look at services, funeral services that are put on by Black and Latinx people, and they look at it almost as if they're looking at a zoo, because they don't understand why people get possessed by the spirit and dance and move their bodies and scream. It's like as if it's not normal. And we're aware of that. It also makes me reflect on the fact that when Black people die, I suspect, and I think it's a suspicion grounded on reality, that the death of Black people is not looked at with the same meaning as when other people die. In other words, I think that people don't even believe that Black people hurt when Black people die. I also was thinking about the lack of respect that Black people who die are given. You know, usually, not all the time, but usually when somebody dies, people even invent good things to say about them when they're not even true. When Black people die, there's a huge effort to find the ugly things or mistakes that those Black people did in order to justify and feel okay about their death. So it's kind of strange. You die and people find out you were arrested for smoking a joint. So let's begin. Let's start. So why don't we start with you, Naya?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I've been thinking about this, as I stated in the opening remarks. I've come up with a little three-part step of a three-step life in a Black body. And I've related it to carnival. And there's a white man named Bakhtin that says these things, that the carnival goes through a cycle. And if you don't know what I mean by carnival, I'm saying Mardi Gras. But in the Caribbean, this is a very Black event. In Haiti, they will paint themselves with molasses, and they will embrace the sugarcane that was killing them as slaves. They will mock the oppressors during Carnival and dress them up as fat, big people and kill them metaphysically or, you know, in some type of way during Carnival. And so there's this embracing of death during Carnival. And Bakhtin says, you know, so during the Carnival cycle, there's a crowning of the Carnival king. Then there's a decrowning of the king. And then there's a recrowning of the next king. And as I was reading this, I began to think about specifically a Saeed Vassal who was killed in Brooklyn last April. And his mom and the community came outside and said, his blood is on you gentrifiers. They said this Jamaican woman came out on the corner and said, because you called the police on him, his blood is on you. And immediately in my head, I went to, let his blood be on us and our children. A quote that has caused so much havoc in our world. But I began to think about the carnival because, just for context, Saeed was killed 2 blocks away from where we celebrate Carnival here in New York, Eastern Parkway. And so I was thinking of Carnival, and I began to see that we as black children, as black children are crowned black. That this death that we're leading up to, it's from the beginning. And our lives are just a carnival in this sad world. And we are crowned black. There's a time where our parents say, hey, you are different because you are black. And we have no idea, what they're saying. But it happens at conversations just like this, around the kitchen table, where they say, hey, you can't say that, though I'm saying you're smart, though I'm saying you're beautiful, that person over there is gonna say, you're ugly, you're dumb. And there's this crowning, this awareness that happens. And then some of us go through a decrowning, like Saeed, where we try to believe what our parents say. We try to believe that we're beautiful and we're powerful and we're mighty and all of these things. And a police officer, anything that is just oppressive comes at us as we celebrate our blackness and decrowns us, takes off our crown. And that either today usually means mass incarceration or that they're going to kill us. And so there is a decrowning there after we have been crowned black, and then we are decrowned black because it seems that we become a threat when we celebrate our blackness. But then after that, the last thing, and I'll end here, is the recrowning. And that is where I see the mourning coming into place, the resiliency. And I noticed this when we were walking in this protest, and we were publicly displaying our anger with Saeed's death, with Saeed being decrowned. And there's a sorrowful way of mourning in the Black Lives Matter protest that makes some of those traditions that we just heard appear, because now we are in public. Now this mother is wailing. Now, now we are calling out this death as injustice. And so there's this sorrowful mourning. But then I was like, well, what does Carnival mean for us? Those days on the Parkway when we are joyfully dissenting, where we are smoking marijuana, where we are drinking, where we are painting ourselves, where we are half naked on the Parkway. And I realized that too was an embracing of the injustices of death. That too was us recrowning ourselves. And so in Black Lives Matter protests and things like that, we are sorrowful, yet we are saying this is an injustice. But then in the Carnival, which is happening right now all over the Caribbean, we are joyful and saying we're going to laugh at this because it is so absurd. We are going to laugh in your face, and we are going to do exactly what you told us not to do. And we are going to recrown ourselves after you decrowned one of us. And so that's where I am. And a lot of this comes from being a Haitian American and waiting at every funeral for my family wouldn't call it this, but when I moved into a community in Homestead, Florida, they called it Ligen Chris, which is, Chris is the spirit that comes up into you and makes you yell and scream that this person has died. But my family, which is interesting, that moved from Haiti straight to Princeton and, so took a flight, not a boat, for context, calls it a panic attack. This Christian family that I come from calls it a panic attack, while the boat people, as we say Ligen Chris, which is a reference to voodoo. So panic attack, you see what's going on here. But in that, and I'll end with this, sorry. When Ligen Chris, tout le monde, everybody says, amwe, which is help. So the person dies and they are screaming, I'm way, I'm way, I'm way, I'm way. Help, 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 help. Which is just like, wait, what's going on? You know, an injustice has happened. And they're saying whoosh, which is like, oh, like my God. You know, there's words we can't even, in Creole, we can't put into English. But whoosh, you know, and they are just like, oh my God, I can't take it. And they're fainting. And they are passing out. They're rolling on the floor because they just cannot take the fact that this has happened, this death has happened, and it's an unjust death. And I think though we may not see it as a killing or something, there's something that is unjust about how we are living and in the environments that we are living in and the health disparities and the natural disaster and just the fact that somebody has to be gone forever. And like even now, so you are actually, our full disclosure, the pictures you are seeing are of Saeed's protest, but before that you were seeing my uncle's funeral. And you know, there's pictures as we stated, and there's a full exposure, and there's a documentation of this injustice as we recrown ourselves and kind of resiliently try to get our dignity back.
Thank you, Naya. As I was listening to you, I was thinking that it's one thing, at least from my perspective, to mourn publicly because that's your tradition. It's another thing to mourn publicly because the death that you're mourning was the cause of criminality or injustice. So it's not normal, I would assume, public mourning. And then they give you 3 days for bereavement, right, Rosalie? So why don't you take?
So I didn't, I'm so happy to be here, actually. Thank you for inviting me. My first memories, so I'm the daughter of a widow, and so I didn't expect to hear about widows even though we're here talking about death. And my mother became a widow at age 30, and it was me, my brother, and my sister. I'm the middle. And what I remember growing up in New York were these masses that were held, there. So these masses that were held for my father, it felt like every month, though it couldn't have been. And we had these masses for 9 years. So for 9 years, people would come together, remember my father, and that's how I remembered him. It was through these coming together, and wail and pray. And tell jokes and laugh and eat. And we couldn't move until this happened. So it needed to happen. And then I learned later, and I always thought like my father was the only dead person I knew, but I grew up in Washington Heights where in the 90s, where actually there was death all around, all the time. My neighbors were always dying, especially the young ones. So, and I'm from the Dominican Republic, and where death happens all the time there too. I mean, death happens at every moment, or cellular and stuff. But anyway, but in the Dominican Republic, when someone dies, you bury them, and then after the burial, for 9 days, there are prayers that need to happen. And so people come through, you don't close the door, you don't turn off the lights, and people pray, and they grieve, and they're silent, and they release. And the idea is that the dead need the living in order to see them through to the next part, to the next phase. But it's really, really important that the people who are alive see them through. And so I was sort of joking, but I mean, death hasn't stopped in my life, but I've gone to work and things like that, whereas where I was a kid, I could go to everything. But as a grown-up, it turns out that you only get 3 days to bereave. And when you come back to work, you're supposed to come back to work. And you're not supposed to talk about who you miss or how you don't quite remember how they laugh, or how sometimes you didn't like them, or whatever. Like, you're not supposed to talk about it, and you're just supposed to return full, your full self. And that feels unnatural to me.
Hi. So coming into this conversation, I want to first bring up that I come from a Pentecostal background, and I grew up in the church since I can ever remember. And I identify as a bicultural woman. My parents migrated from Jamaica over 25 years ago. And coming into this conversation, Nai's asking me what did I know about death and mourning, and I'm like, but I don't know anything. And he said, aha, that's something. And I'm like, well, really? And as I've been doing research, he was right. And lifting up my context in the Pentecostal tradition, I found myself seeing how we push escapism into our mourning process, and how that affects our mourning and how we mourn creates this dichotomy between the righteous and unrighteous, and how that suppresses mourning. And what I mean by this escapist mentality is that we devalue the life we have here on earth, that when you are being called home to the Lord, that you are at home. And not recognizing that this life that we have is home also. And I think it would be worthwhile to just mention, we've seen righteous as no smoking, no profanity, of that nature. Just don't do these things. And, unrighteous being those things, and righteous on the opposite side of that. And for me, I've experienced death, but I don't feel like I have dealt with death. And what I mean by that is in 2009 and 2016, my aunt died of breast cancer, and my uncle died of a liver disease. And when I was an adolescent, my mourning only confirmed that death happened. That was it. And they were just no longer a part of the living. And when we talked about them, we glorified their life, because I knew my uncle was a God-fearing man. And I knew my aunt was a God-fearing woman. And when I want to bring this conversation up to my mom, we will always have very minimal conversation, and then her lasting words would be but she's with the Lord. But he's with the Lord. Don't have to worry about it. They left. They don't have to worry about suffering here and sin and what we see, and they are better off than what we have to continuously wake up day in and day out and have to deal with, right? And for me, I realized how that affected how I have a relationship with my aunt and uncle. And in the previous panel, there is a continuous celebration. There's continuously seeing life and bringing them into spaces. And I remember my mom constantly telling me, Auntie Pinky wanted to come to Jamaica. She wanted to come here and surprise you for your high school graduation, right? And she didn't see me graduate from high school. But I wonder, and I sit here and I wonder, how would she feel now seeing that I'm getting a master's degree? I haven't brought her along this journey. I never thought of bringing her along this journey. And thinking how I want to change the conversation of how I deal with this idea of escapism, and seeing how I want to call this forth, and escapism. Again, like devaluing this life, not seeing the goodness of what this life can be. And with that, you can be complacent and not wanting to provide justice here and now, because you feel like, why am I doing justice? I'm leaving at some point. And that's not okay, because we still have to speak up. We still have to speak up to injustices. We still have to feed the poor. We still have to help people. And for people that don't see that, that's easy. That's an easy way to just see life. And for me, a big part of just reflecting is when I call into sacred memory, and I want to call forth the people that have influenced my life, the memories that I've had of my aunt and my uncle. And one of that being, when someone asks me how many brothers I have, I say 2. The real answer is it should be 3. And one of my brothers died before I was even thought of. And we don't have conversations about my brother. He would have been 27. I'm 24. We would have been well off. We would have been cool. We would have been connecting. We would have grown up together, but we don't talk about him at all. So when I say I want to call into sacred memories, I want to make sure that we bring in sacred memories to generational narratives. When I have a kid one day, hopefully, I want to tell them that I had 3 brothers, and I may not have known the one physically, but I would have spiritually. I know him, and I think for me that has been the biggest gift of reflecting because of this process and viewing Mourning and having ancestral relationships with my family. So, thank you.
I like that issue of escapism and making this life more important than what it should be. It reminds me of an article that the Christian social ethicist Jose Miguel Bonino wrote in regards to Latin America, and the title was, "Is There Life Before Death?" And I think Christian tradition has always talked about the future because it worked for some Christians, the ones that were living a good life here. So it's okay to talk about that because you're living a good one already. But when you're living one of oppression, thinking about the future could be more detrimental to us than not. It's like opiate for the people. Hassan.
Yeah, so I hear in this panel a lot of connections that I want to make really briefly. I hear with you, Dr. Cruz, trying to find my notes, opening up with the meaninglessness of Black death. And then Naya, you following up with this idea of crowning and crowns. And immediately my mind went to what kind of crown? Is this a crown of glory, or is this a crown of thorns? Was the question that first came to mind. And then I heard you, I believe, Dr. Cruz, then responding to Naya with the publicity of Black death and Black mourning, how it just kind of pervades our social imagination, what's made available in the media and so forth. And then Rosalie, speaking to the intimacies, your own personal intimacies with death. And then Nordia speaking to, which I think is such an important piece for my own reflections around Black escapism. particularly in the Pentecostal church. I'm a charismatic Baptist, and so we dance and speak in tongues and fall out and all of that and carry on so bad, like Pentecostals do. But I think that for me, right, like that's I think a really important, right, intervention in what it means to be an African American, right? That there are legacies of not only African traditional religions, but slave religion and plantation religion that continue to live into an afterlife in our own experiences. So what I'm thinking about, I have a lot of different notes that are kind of messy right now, but what I'm thinking about is Orlando Patterson's concept of social death. And basically Orlando Patterson is thinking about the intimacies, right, that Rosalie is speaking to, that I hear, Rosalie, what I hear you speaking to is this like really grounded intimacy with the death experience, that we live in geographies and spaces and locales that are deathly, that our lives are colored and engendered by a deathliness that we really cannot escape, and that this death is not always immediate, but that this death is it's both immediate and steady and constant. It looks like, right, police shootings that pervade, right, our social media and therefore our social imagination, what we imagine Black people to be and to do in the world. But it also is like constant and slow moving. It looks like Black people dying at rapid rates from health, right, from health conditions that can be cured. But because we don't have the large majority of us disproportionately do not have access to affordable health care, right, that actually is going to aid in our recovery, that's going to aid in our health, that we die for reasons that most people survive. And that it's not necessarily, right, like for me, the thought is that I cannot imagine that this is merely coincidental, right? But because to be an African in the Americas, right? We get here by way of death. We get here by way of, right, not only incarceration but chattel. We get here because we are seen as things that are disposable and expendable and that can be thrown away and utilized in ways that have nothing to do with life. And so we're already historically contextualized within categories that are deathly. And so I hear in that, like, I hear you speaking to these intimacies that have now lived beyond the event of colonization, right? Beyond the event of enslavement, beyond the plantation, but live into an afterlife that meets us in Brooklyn or the Bronx or, or like down the street, right? Like when I walk out of Union's doors, I have to be ever so cognizant because of the ways that this place is set up with policing, hyper-policing and surveillancing and security guards that smile in my face but are looking me up and down every time, because they're not really sure if I belong here or not. Especially because, right, like there are days when I have a suit and all is well, but then there are days when I don't, right, and I'm comfortable and I have my jeans and my hoodie and what have you, and I'm given a hard time because I'm narrated in a way that still lives into these legacies of deathliness, right, because I'm not someone but something deserving to die for whatever means. And so that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing insofar as, right, there are, like Orlando Patterson speaks, there are these concepts of social death. And so, right, so it's like, because we already live, so-called live under these auspices of death, when we die, our death can have no meaning because our life had no meaning. Right, so I hear you, right, speaking to this concept of, the meaninglessness of Black death. That's only because there is the meaninglessness of Black life. And so we speak to, these now slogans that are in vogue and popular and give people social and political clout called Black Lives Matter, and they wear them on T-shirts, and they can get money, and they can get resources and grant money and so on and so forth, and they could commodify our death, right? They can commodify our death because they have now approximated some kind of social justice rhetoric that is still very grounded in what it takes, right, to wear that shirt, and that is Black death. It is an investment in our death, in our death, not in our life. And so when I hear, right, statements like Black Lives Matter, the question for me is, are you speaking to a particular reality that we're living, or are you speaking to almost like an eschatological vision, right? A hope for. And I think that is what I hear in your statement, right, around Black people, particularly Black Pentecostals, who speak about life beyond, or life in heaven, or life with God. I hear in that, because I've also asked these same questions. And for me, right, I'm not necessarily in the business of blaming Black people for anything. I think that we are brilliant, right? I'm done proving Black brilliance. I'm done making arguments, right? White supremacy, as I believe Toni Morrison states, is to waste our time. They say we're ugly, we prove we're not. They say we're dumb, we prove we're not. I'm not in that business. But my priority is to suggest that Black people have forever known, right, that the world stands against our life sources. We've forever known that. And so for me, it captures what it actually means, right, to speak eschatologically, whether it be Black Lives Matter, or I'm going to heaven to live in the by and by, right? That these things speak to the reality of Black deathliness, right? It is to actually say that, yes, I understand this world actually has nothing for me. It actually, it is both, right? It is to engender, because those people, my grandmother and I, together, we sing those songs and we believe those things about the world and about God and about theology. And we go out and we picket, and we go out and we do what we need to do, right? Like, these things are held in tandem. It's not completely divorced from what is possible in the world. It's not wholly divorced from, like Jesus, Jesus heaven on earth. But or Paul's, whoever. But it does for me capture Black people taking very seriously and not standing in denial the reality that the world has forever been against us since the dawn of modernity, and that that it is a disservice to us to deny that.
So I think to end, the first panel spoke about the wonderful historical and modern rituals that Black people have to deal with death and mourning. But I think it was James Cone, and maybe he got it from somebody else, but there was a Broadway or a show that I went to. He said, they asked him about when he's going to die. He said, "Let me down gently." Is those the words he used? Let me down gently. And so I think a question that we can't answer tonight, but we should ponder or think about, is how can we die in peace? We have the rituals for when you're dead already, but how can we die in peace? In other words, die with the way we should die, not a death that comes from injustice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And so we have a couple minutes left. And I'm just going to ask, the reason why you're all sitting around tables is because the structure of this event is we're going to leave some time to discuss. For those of us who come from these traditions, are Black, Caribbean, or from other Black communities, just to spend about 10 minutes. So if you can stay, we would love for you to stay. And to talk about these things. So if you are a facilitator, if you can just raise your hand so that your table can see you, Dr. Yang. Yeah, and some of them are here. But these are your facilitators, and they have some questions for you to start some conversation. So we leave some time with that. Maybe we can start with Dr. Cruz's question. You want to ask that one more time?
How can we die in peace and in justice?
Hey, good, how are you? Good to see you. Good to see you too. Oh, it's okay. They're just talking. 2-minute warning. 2-minute warning. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Yes, 2-minute wrap up. 2-minute wrap up.
That's basically what the pitch I'm gonna make. You know, I mean, Fred already knows, and now I'm gonna like let Serene know. Like, listen, you know, Naya needs to be here in order for this to happen. You know, and we'll keep doing that. What happened? Oh wow.
You need 2 more minutes? You need 2 more or are you good? You good? We have a table requesting 2 more minutes. I'm going to give them 30 seconds. 30 seconds. Yeah. Exactly.
So what I'm gonna do is also.
Okay, everyone. We are going to bring. But before doing that, first I'm going to invite Lisa to join us. Our back table with President Jones is having an amazing conversation. we'd like to invite you, if you are enjoying these conversations and you are not at Union Seminary, we have many of these conversations at many times. So we invite you to come back to many of the different conversations we are having. Michelle Alexander is here at times and hosting conversations just like these, and we will continue to do so. But before I end, I want to acknowledge some of the organizations that have joined us today. We have Dominicans Love Haitians Movement in the back, which is doing amazing, amazing, amazing work. And you can write a love letter to a child in the Dominican Republic or Haiti at that station over there. And so if you have a quick second, we would love for you to do that to support this movement that is reconciling the people of Hispaniola. And then we have the, I don't want to say this, Northern Manhattan Immigration and Human Rights. Sorry, Coalition for Immigrant Rights. Sorry, I'm so sorry. And so you can check out their services. They have some flyers and such things. And it's good even if, you feel this doesn't relate to you, to take that material because your neighbor, whoever it may be, may need that information that we can pass along. And that's what we really hope to do, is empower the community here. And then the last organization here is Incultured Company, which is a new organization. One of our students here at Union, Alexis Francisco, is a part of. And they are doing something very special, at least to me, as a Haitian. Incultured has committed itself to getting Dominicans and Haitians in the same room. So very similar work between these two. And so getting Dominicans and Haitians in the same room to talk about our history, to talk about our pain, and to talk about our the injustice and the death that is happening between these two people. And so they actually are having a fundraiser March 30th, to support their work. They are a new organization, no funding, no anything, just doing this out of the desire of their hearts, but also out of their Dominican and Haitian blood to see some justice happening. And so they are having a fundraiser to raise funds because they have been asked to take their program to schools in Boston, to schools in the Bronx, and to really get this even just outside of people who are interested, but also start to go at it at the root. So if you would like to just touch base with those organizations in the back. And then I'm going to ask Associate Vice President Jonathan Soto, who is in charge of the Center for Community Engagement and Social Justice here at Union, to tell you all a little bit about what is next for us at Theologizing the Caribbean's Decolonization and more.
Thank you very much. I just really want to honor you. I want to thank you. Naya is a storm in more ways than one, in the sense that able to kind of navigate between order and chaos and ensuring that the things that need to be stirred within us and the things that need to be stirred within this institution actually breathe and create new life and new possibilities. And all this is Naya. I had nothing to do with this. Naya, from soup to nuts, and really your vision, your persistence, and I just want to honor you for creating these spaces and these places that are so necessary. So please, let's acknowledge your work. And additionally, Dr. Cruz, once we started in the beginning of this year, Theologizing and Decolonization, which our first engagement happened on decolonizing the Caribbean, understanding the need for transnational solidarity between folks in the Caribbean from Black, brown perspectives in light
of climate change in light of disaster capitalism. And we had Dr. Marta Moreno Vega that was with us, and we're actually concluding that series with an experiential trip happening in Puerto Rico in May. That was what gave birth, and it was part of this programming from the Center for Community Engagement and Social Justice, which is really seeking to kind of like invert like these asymmetries of power that exist between institutions and the folks within those institutions that are usually charged with carrying the burden most, but see themselves less reflected from the programming that that institution creates. And in a time where we're seeing an inversion throughout the world of all institutions, where we're seeing that the hills are made into valleys, that the last shall be made first, it is really Naya who has been at the front end creating and building this type of engagement, which led us to the conversation today about inverting the narrative on death. And not only inverting the narrative on death, but understanding from the Black experience, as you've been putting forth, the need to be able to see that inversion and to be seeing this perspective. And what's happening in May, we're going to then have Decolonizing Healing, a conversation on how we can move away from the Western-centric conceptions of healing and looking how we could decenter that analysis to understand our relationships to healing vis-a-vis our bodies, vis-a-vis the earth, vis-a-vis nature. And this is really a part of the center's work to ensure that seminarians can see themselves reflected of the programming that comes out of here. So that even though we know institutions, most times don't center the analysis of those that are in the lower end of that power asymmetry, that we could flip it to the degree that it is possible. And we want to thank President Jones for being with us today, for allowing these spaces to happen. We want to thank Dr. Niang for participating in this conversation today. Professor Chung, Dr. Chung, thank you so much for joining us in this space today. And to all the faculty, we see our friends from Center for Earth Ethics here. Pitcher Tomes, thank you so much for being with us today, and for anybody else that we may have missed. So please engage the folks that are in the back, engage their tables, and stay tuned. I missed someone? No, see you in May. Oh, and so we're going to come back in May. And we're going to do an indoor-outdoor thing because we cannot talk about decolonizing healing by being within this space and not being outside in nature. So we just want to thank you. Feel free to just speak to one another. Yeah, let this conversation continue. What time do we have to leave this space? A couple of minutes, yeah. But, feel free to move gingerly. But thank you all. God bless you.
But please, as I always remind everyone, that our people, our Caribbean people, clean this space. So if you can help them by removing all trash.
Thank you all.